This morning, the service has been written by the Reverend Shirley Gale. Shirley is a retired minister living now in Guelph. And several of the examples she has used are for seniors. And you people who are not seniors, but looking forward to being one, I see a hand waving. Let me tell you, it's not sitting back and watching the world go by with those rosy glasses they tell us. It doesn't just happen that way. And that's not what God wants us to do either. So just you may have different thoughts about retiring. Shirley starts her meditation with an episode from a book called Disappointment with God. And in this story, Philip Yancey relates the story from his own life. One time when Yancey and his mother were looking through a box of old photos, he came across a crumpled picture of himself at 18 months. He asked her why she had kept this one. And his mother explained that Yancey's father, at 24, had lain completely paralyzed by polio and was encased in an iron lung. Due to the severity of his illness, his two young sons were banned from the hospital. So Yancey's mother hung the photo from the breathing unit just above Yancey's father's head. The last 4 months of his life were spent looking at the faces he loved. Yancey said, "That crumpled photo was one of the few links connecting me to my father. Sometimes I have no memory of, someone I have no memory of, and who spent all day, every day, loving me." Yancey went on to say, "The emotions I felt when I saw that crumpled photo were the very same emotions I felt that night in my college dorm room when I first believed in a God of love and realized someone is there who loves me. It was a startling feeling of wild hope, a feeling so new and overwhelming that it seemed fully worth risking his life on." And that photo and what it represented had a profound impact on Philip Yancey's life and faith. I'm sure neither his father nor his mother would ever have thought that God would work so powerfully through such a simple thing as a photo, nor did they likely consider themselves to be missionaries to their own son. We serve a God who is always at work, a God whose love is unmeasurable, unconditional, and missional. Missional? Yes. Our God is a missional God, whose mission is to draw all peoples to himself in love. God pursues this mission in more ways than we can possibly imagine. And one of those ways is through people. The primary purpose of the church, therefore, is for its people to go into the world, near and far, serving God as missionaries. Serving isn't always easy, nor in ways that we expect. It is not unusual to hear seniors in the church, especially those we refer to as shut-ins, express their thoughts that due to age and the limitations of age, that they can no longer have a role in the mission of the church. Their limitations, such as failing memory, forgetting names, we all have them sometimes, dependency on walkers, the inability to drive, sometimes keep them feeling useful. But Dorothy was one such person. She attended the Presbyterian Church in a small town. She was a lifetime member of the WMS, and she attended worship regularly. She was very active in the congregation until shortly after the birth of her daughter, when she became bedridden with a crippling illness. So each day for many years, her husband would carry Dorothy to a specially constructed seat in their front window, where she would spend the day overlooking the town's main street. Jean was a shy 6-year-old girl who attended Sunday school at the same church. And she started visiting Dorothy twice a week. In the summer, she would take flowers. And these visits continued until Dorothy's death 7 years later. But during these visits, Dorothy would talk about her life, her faith, and all the wonderful things that she had observed from her second-floor window. In her gentle way, Dorothy taught and mentored Jean in her faith journey and planted the seeds of her understanding of mission. Dorothy made Jean feel that she was an acceptable, worthy person whom God loved. What a wonderful gift Dorothy gave an extremely shy girl. Isn't it amazing how God used a woman who could no longer walk to help a young girl to walk with new dignity and joy? Jean eventually answered God's call and served as an ordained minister. Dorothy was only one of many people who over the years helped Jean shape her life and her faith. Dorothy may not have realized it, but she was a missionary right there in her own home. Today, there is still a great need for a missionary-minded, nurturing community for the church to be what God calls it to be and Jesus commanded it to be. We are to be a caring place where people seek God's guidance to discover effective and meaningful ways to participate in God's mission. As God's missionaries, we are called to use as we are able whatever gifts and means God entrusts to us, regardless of our age or physical limitation. It is not only one's age or physical limitations that can stand in the way of useful or fulfilling God's call to serve. With work or family obligations, one can feel there isn't enough time. With financial challenges, one can feel there isn't enough money. And with our personal discomfort or misgivings about our abilities, one can feel that they are not properly equipped. But it is important to trust that God has given us the gifts and the means, and we only have to listen and to act. We are reminded by the Apostle Paul that it is often at our own point of weakness that God does his greatest work. Paul pleaded with God to relieve him of his weakness, which he called a thorn in the flesh. And God responded to Paul in 2 Corinthians saying, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." Indeed, it is often in times of weakness that God calls us to tasks we feel unable to accomplish. Shirley Gale, who wrote the mission program for today, was reminded of this one Sunday just before worship at her church in Guelph. And a woman who was holding a position called pastoral assistant came up and asked Shirley if she would take over her position as pastoral assistant. The woman named Anne had held this ministry remarkably well for 10 years, but at 82, she wanted to retire. After much prayer, she asked Shirley, and Shirley gave the answer, "I'm too old to start a new ministry." And Shirley was then 73 and had retired from ministry because of multiple sclerosis. And she smiled and thanked Anne for asking her and went on to enjoy the morning service. Anne, however, was convinced that if Shirley prayerfully considered the ministry, she would realize that she still had a job to do. So she invited Shirley for lunch and further discussion. And finally, you probably know the answer, with much trepidation, she accepted the position. And she says the following years have been very rewarding and meaningful, but even at times very physically challenging. Shirley's initial refusal to consider this new mission was because, like many seniors, she believed her age and disease had made her unfit. She felt old and limited. But shortly after taking up the position of pastoral assistant, she was reminded during a visit she made with a woman by the name of Margaret that God does use us despite our limitations. Margaret is also a member of Knox Guelph, who for more than 10 years has resided in a full care facility, bedridden because of severe lupus and rheumatoid arthritis. She can no longer move without assistance, nor can she feed herself. And yet Margaret cheerfully greets each visitor with a warm, bright smile and a receptive ear. She knows the name of each staff person, their spouses, their children. She loves to hear about the happenings in the lives of each person who enters her room. And what is exceptional about Margaret is her deep faith and the way she shares it so sincerely and simply with everyone. She believes her mission is prayer and encouragement for those who do and those who don't know the Lord. She does it humbly and faithfully. Margaret is one of the persons who has caused Shirley to reflect anew on the nature of mission and how it is so often reciprocal, or as Shirley now calls it, reciprocal care. Shirley puts it this way: reciprocal care is simply caring for others and acknowledging that others can and do care for us in turn. And for this reason, it is an integral and inseparable part of mission. And we are people who are retired. We have many examples in our own community of someone retired and taking on a new mission. And Bob Newman is going to talk to us about this.
Don't be confused, I'm not retired. About 4 years ago, Barb Hillis heard that a former Petrolia resident named Bill Bowers was to receive a Diamond Jubilee Award for his, or medal, for his ministry to the street people of Toronto. She learned that along with working at the soup kitchen at his Salvation Army Church, where he was a retired captain, he took handmade knitted scarves and took them to the young people, the young men and women who were street people in Toronto, and gave them out with God's blessing and letting each recipient know that God loved them and the people who knitted the scarves also cared for them. Barb was inspired to knit herself and encouraged some of us here at St. Andrews to do it as well. She got the local newspaper to print an article about Bill Bowers' ministry, and because our church isn't open always during the week, she asked if I would open my pharmacy to be a drop-off place for people donating scarves. I agreed to do that, as did Gladys, at her craft shop in Sarnia. Well, it wasn't long before the scarves started to trickle in, and before too long, they started pouring in. Some people used their knitting skills to help, while others donated wool they had sitting around and maybe couldn't use anymore, or some actually purchased the wool for others to knit the scarves. Scarves came in from all over the county, and even a couple of loads from Newfoundland, believe it or not. Altogether, I estimate that there were over 50 to 60 different people who knitted scarves, and over the last 3.5 years, we've collected and with my wife Jenny's help delivered to Toronto between 900 and 1,000 scarves. Now, we talk about reciprocating care. I started to notice the smiles on the faces of those people who were dropping off the scarves they had knitted. And many shared how happy they were to have the opportunity to help someone far away. I shared with them and some of you some of the letters I've received from Bill Bowers. And this is part of one that I received in early March I'd like to share with you now. It has been a long, tough winter here in Toronto. 3 men were found dead from the cold this winter. And then there was the shock of the little boy who wandered off from his home. But God has been great to me, and I am still giving away scarves. Bill is 78 years old this year. Amazingly, a school teacher contacted me from a difficult, poor part of the city and asked me if I had extra scarves I could give him for some of his school children. I never even thought about the children before. He later, after I was able to share some scarves and hats and mitts with him, he later shared with me that one little girl's mother told me that her daughter actually took her scarf and wore it to bed at night because of the cold winter. Again, please thank all of those that have worked so hard in Petrolia, which is a wonderful, extra special place to me. God is so pleased. Personally, helping the Scarf Ministry has not only opened my eyes to what our congregation can do in mission work, but reminded me of my roots in the Salvation Army where I grew up. And recently, Ginny dropped off some scarves in Toronto, and Bill Bowers handed her a book. And it was a book. I had shared with Bill that I had grown up and lived with my grandmother, who was a Salvation Army captain, and we attended a Salvation Army church when I was between the ages of 6 and 10 years old. And Bill sent a book, which is the history of the Salvation Church in Windsor, Ontario. And I was able for the first time to open up a book and look at the church that I had attended and when I was very young. And my memory of Onward Christian Soldiers, every time we sing that, that's where it takes me. So I want to tell you that caring and sharing is reciprocal, that I have learned that when you help in a cause and give, it not only spreads, but also you are rewarded. Thank you.
I'm not finished. It is a wonderful mission that the community here has done with knitting scarves. I know in our building next door, we even had men who hadn't knit, probably since they were a child just playing with. We had men knitting scarves last year. A wonderful mission. I often wish I could follow a scarf that I knit and see where it went and what happened to it. I hope it went to the boy who wore it to bed. Wouldn't that be great? The things we do for good, they affect the lives of others, but we have no knowledge of what is going on. Every day is a new day God has given us, in which we can have an impact on the world around us. A day when we can touch the lives of others with the caring love of our God, and in the process be touched by them. Opportunities and need for mission are all around us. It can be as close as your own home, your doorstep. It can be next door to you, or it can be far away in places that we only dream and read about. Often this reciprocated gift is so unobtrusively given that we at first may not recognize that we have received as much or more than we have given. And even though we are unlikely to ever know the full impact of our caring on the life of another, we are called to care nevertheless. For a great many years, the Presbyterian Church in Canada, through its international mission work of the Presbyterian World Service and Development, International Ministries, the Women's Missionary Society, and many others, have positively impacted the lives and well-being of countless numbers of people in many different countries throughout the world. Mission outreach projects have been done by the WMS Society here at St. Andrews. When they were given some money, they decided to make turkey pies here at the church, and they were taken to the food bank and given out on Thanksgiving Day, Thanksgiving Monday, for those who needed. They also put together birthday bags, and in each birthday bag was a cake mix, icing, candles for a cake, and a gift. And these were to be given out by the food bank for a child who was having a birthday during that time. And they also have a prayer partner. This year, their prayer partner is in the Caribou District of British Columbia. It's a husband and wife team working up there. And we can pray for them together at our meetings, and we encourage our members to pray for them individually in their personal prayers. So supporting mission is an ongoing job. Reciprocare is a gift that blesses us, those who receive and the ones who give. It's a gift of constant loving care. And the Apostle Paul reminds us of the importance of this ministry. In his letter to the Romans, he says, I long to see you, that I may impart to you some spiritual gift to make you strong. But then he checks himself, and he says a little bit later, that is, that you and I may be mutually encouraged by each other's faith. Our response to God's gift and God's care can be nothing less than the intentional and faithful response of sharing the gifts of God's caring love with the world that he created. Whether you feel it is your age, work, family obligations, financial, personal misgivings that make you unable to accomplish God's call, remember that his love and grace equips you to be a missionary today, near and far. God's mission is a loving redemption and renewal of all people in creation. It is in this mission we are called to live each day, or as one person has said, we are called to be the living Gospels. And Jesus gave the command in Mark when he said, go into all the world and proclaim the good news to the whole creation. And sometimes we think God puts a lot on our plate. We get kind of bogged down with so many things to do, and we wonder how we're going to get through them. But I think one of the most important verses in the Bible is in Matthew 28:18, when Jesus assures us that we do not journey alone, for he said, and remember, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. Thanks be to God.